friends, what if you eat grapes every day? Have you ever been told to avoid grapes because there's just too much sugar in them? It's one of the most common pieces of nutrition advice floating around in social media. But what if I told you that the same fruit people fear for its sugar quantity may actually protect your blood vessels, lower inflammation, and even activate the same longevity pathways triggered by fasting? So yes, grapes, they are sweet, but the story doesn't end there. Today, we're going to peel back the layers on this teeny tiny but powerful fruit. Its antioxidant power, the way it supports your gut and liver, and how something inside the grape may actually mimic the effects of caloric restriction. And by the end of this video, I'll show you 10 powerful real food recipes so you can enjoy grapes without massively spiking your blood sugar. So let's start with the elephant in the room, sugar. A cup of grapes has about roughly 23 grams of sugar. Now, that sounds like a whole lot, especially when compared to, let's say, berries. But here's what's often missed. That sugar is bound inside fiber. If I squish the grapes, it's full of water and polyphenol. There's this matrix of fiber that traps in the sugar. And after all that, grapes actually have a low glycemic load compared to refined white sugar. Yes, it's in fructose and glucose in natural ratios, not added high fructose corn syrup. The real problem isn't the grape. It's the company grapes are compared to, like candy, soda, and juice. This grape is a metabolic powerhouse in context. It's not in isolation. When you eat grapes, your body doesn't absorb the sugar in this grape like you would the sugar in a soda or even grape juice. And why is that? Because grapes have more than sugar. It has water, fiber that slows absorption. You literally need to chew this grape. And if you swallowed it without properly chewing it, well, that simply would be a choking hazard. And don't do this with grapes. I am always amazed at people's talent. Now, how fast can you chug down soda? And yes, he and you will absorb all of that sugar in soda water. Now, did you know that there's far more sugar dissolved in soda than what plain water can naturally hold? You know, at room temperature, plain water can dissolve roughly about 2,000 grams or 2 kilograms of sugar per liter of water before it reaches saturation. But that's really in lab conditions. Now, if you remember your high school chemistry, you know that when you reach saturation, then things start precipitating out of solution. And you're going to have sugar crystals at the bottom of your cup if you did that. But if you've ever finished a can of soda to the very bottom, sipping every last drop, you know that doesn't taste grainy at all. But the reality is you will not be able to recreate the amount of sugar that is dissolved in commercial sodas. Because in everyday use, if you just stir sugar into a glass of plain water, most people would only be able to dissolve a few teaspoons, roughly 10 to 50 grams per liter, before it really tastes horribly sweet, and then it starts settling at the bottom. However, commercial sodas, and really you can take any brand, if you read their labels, they put 39 grams of added sugar per 12-ounce can. That's 355 milliliters. And that's roughly 110 grams per liter, which is twice as much as what you can do at home. And so there is far more sugar than what most people would naturally dissolve into a glass of water and actually make it drinkable. Manufacturers can do this because they add heat to the liquid. And when you add heat, you dissolve more sugar. They also carbonate it and they add acids, which increase perceived sweetness and helps keep the sugar dissolved. This is why homemade lemonade is also really bad. The acid covers up the syrupy taste of waters, so you end up putting a lot more sugar, just like soda. Now, soda doesn't feel syrupy like pure sugar water because of the carbonation. That carbonation gives the drink a crisp bite that masks the thickness. And guess what? They also add other acids. Other acids like phosphoric acid or citric acid, that also cuts down the sweetness, but gives you other metabolic consequences. And don't forget the sugar is then fully dissolved under pressure so that you don't see sugar crystals. But the thing is, your gut, all that sugar will be absorbed within minutes after you drink the soda. And then you're going to spike your blood sugars. And then you will spike your insulin because that's what your body will naturally want to do to lower your blood sugars that you just dumped from the soda. But the thing is, gram per gram, you won't see the sugar spike as high as eating white bread because sugar is a chemical sucrose, which is half fructose, and the other half is glucose. Glucose is what spikes your blood sugars, and white bread is pure glucose. That's why white bread will spike your blood sugars higher than drinking sugar water, basically soda, for the same amount of sugar. However, the problem was that because sucrose is half fructose, that fructose, even though it doesn't spike your blood sugar, it will make you more insulin resistant. And it makes you diabetic even faster because when you eat fructose, you're really eating a chemical that is only metabolized in the liver. Now, natural fructose in a grape is going to be metabolized by your gut because it's buffered by fiber and water. But pure fructose, like high fructose corn syrup, it goes directly to your liver. And unfortunately, the liver can't dump it. So it gets converted into saturated fat. And that is how you get fatty liver. The more fructose from sucrose you eat, the fattier the liver. And you don't want to confuse fructose as a chemical with some fructose inside this grape. Remember, the fructose inside this grape, it's really trapped in a fiber matrix. It's trapped as well as in sucrose. So there's multiple steps before you can access the fructose. This whole thing is wrapped by grape skin. You see this grape skin? Inside the grape skin is where the magic lives. This purple grape skin is where the polyphenols, including resveratrol, quercetin, catechins, and anthocyanins, they live. So you can't get rid of the grape skin when you eat grapes. Now, these names all sound foreign. They sound like foreign chemical names, but you really should get to know them because that is the longevity molecules in these grape skins. And it's also in the seeds. These micronutrients, they protect your DNA by reducing oxidative stress. These compounds also slow down the enzymes that break down sugar and activate AMPK, the longevity switch. They increase nitric oxide for better blood flow, and overall, it makes your cells younger by improving mitochondria efficiency. So while you taste sweetness, your cells are actually getting a metabolic upgrade, not a sugar bomb. And if you've ever tasted homegrown fresh grapes plucked right out of the vine, you know that there's only so many grapes you can eat before your mouth basically a little sore. And that's because unlike grape candy, when you eat too much of these fresh grapes, especially fresh from the vine, those fresh grapes are packed with polyphenols, cause a little bit of irritation in your mouth, and that acts as a natural stopping agent so that you don't overeat. Several clinical studies have shown that whole grapes, they don't cause prolonged spikes in blood sugar in healthy people. But what about people with insulin resistance, like pre-diabetes and diabetes? Now, I bet you will be super surprised that grapes actually improve insulin sensitivity over time. The polyphenols, this purple color, they actually inhibit glucose transporters in the gut. They flatten the post-meal sugar curves. And this is why grapes can't be compared to soda or even grape soda. They're not the same, even with the identical grams of sugar. And on top of that, when you drink that soda, you're going to just get more hungry and eat more food. But if you eat the equivalent amount of grapes, you're going to get fiber and hydration. This is a low calorie, high fiber, high micronutrient food. It's dense to help increase your satiety. Basically, it makes you full so you eat less other junk food. But here's a tip on finding the most nutritious grapes. Guess the ones with seeds, which I know is super hard to find. And when I was growing up, there was only seeded grapes. And as a kid, I hated those seeds because they were hard. I would have to spit them out and it would be so messy. But now I actually want to eat the seeds and I can't find grape seeds because the supermarket only sells seedless grapes, unless you go to an Asian supermarket. Grape seeds have more polyphenols like resveratrol, more protein, and more fiber than the skin of grapes. And it's full of micronutrients. And here's another tip on how to eat grapes that will give you the best blood sugar results. Over the next several days, start eating your meals rich in leafy greens and beans, or basically legumes. Leafy greens and legumes, they help you get more insulin sensitive. And do you know why? They're high in fiber and they're also low in saturated fat. And they're rich in micronutrients. So the more legumes and leafy greens you eat, the better your insulin resistance will be so that you can tolerate eating cups of grapes. It's worth trying and worth reversing your insulin resistance because these grapes are longevity foods. Now, when you eat leafy greens, you have to eat enough of it. And there's just no way you're going to eat as much as an elephant, right? So that's why it's important to eat legumes because they're packed in fiber and micronutrients and essential proteins and carbohydrates that your body needs to get insulin sensitive. Hi, friends. I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now. Now, let's talk about saturated fat. Every time I mention saturated fat, my colleagues, they always think about heart disease and cholesterol. And I know there's this big online debate with medical doctors and carnivore and keto doctors and whether or not it worsens cardiovascular disease. Now, cardio refers to heart and vascular means blood vessels. But really, nobody talks about worsening insulin resistance because there's no debate. It is absolutely true, saturated fat worsens insulin resistance, but they'll get around that fact by telling you that the trick is don't eat your carbs, go low carb, and your insulin will go down. Now, that's like telling someone if you step off a roof, you're going to fall, right? Now, that's really just no brainer. It's common sense. It's, of course, if you don't eat any carbs, you're not going to see sugar spikes. That's not the point. How can you eat carbs and not see sugar spikes? Now, that takes a lot more thought and a lot more knowledge than simply randomly avoiding carbohydrate. But just because you don't spike your sugars and you have your insulin low, does that mean you're going to increase your longevity? Well, 99.9% of the answer is no. But of course, if you're comparing yourself to the lifespan of a lab rat, yeah, that's no big deal. You can pretty much eat whatever you want as long as you're getting your essential nutrients. And I'm pointing out a lab rat because these influencers, they often quote lab rat studies to support whether or not they should eat something. And yeah, if your comparison is to an animal that basically lives about 2 years, then that's really not a high bar. And pretty much you put any little effort, you'll get anything but an F. But if your goal is to get an A plus and to be healthy, not just to live long, but to have health span, then you really need to keep up the health of your blood vessels. And did you know that if you lined up all your blood vessels, you would circle around the earth 4 times? That's how many blood vessels your body has. You literally have 100,000 miles of blood vessels that you have to keep healthy. Now, blood vessels are akin to train tracks. Now, just like how America expanded with the help of trains before cars and planes, I mean, yeah, sure, they used horses, but they expanded rapidly when they had trains. But if you lived in a city that didn't get a train stop, then you wouldn't get stocked up with supplies, right? So your blood vessels are responsible to stock up your organs and cells with supplies like nutrients and water. Now, my friend, she has a son that went to UC San Diego, and he used to take the train to go home, but all of a sudden, the train tracks broke and the train didn't run. So then she had to go and pick her son up back and forth, which was several hours just one way. Now, your body works the same way, except that there's no backup system. So if your train tracks get blocked, like with plaque, well, you basically have no second alternative transportation mechanism. And when that happens, you're not going to get your food and hydration that your body parts need. So what suffers? Well, probably first your organs like your kidneys suffer and your skin suffers. And then slowly bigger body parts starts to die from the lack of nutrition and hydration. That's called ischemia. That can really happen to any body part. Ischemic stroke is a stroke in your brain. Ischemic heart disease is basically a heart attack. Ischemia in your foot is basically called gangrene. But before it gets to that severe of an irreversible permanent damage in those organs, you're going to have like little minor symptoms like dry skin, neuropathy, maybe headaches, right? So it's really, really important that you don't go for years with these symptoms and not do anything about it. And if you eat strategically, like these grapes, to reduce oxidative stress, then you don't mess up your train tracks so that you continue to get blood flow and nutrition. Oxidation is really the key word. Just normal bodily functions will produce oxidative stress, even if you don't eat anything bad. However, when you increase the oxidative stress, like when you eat saturated fat, you're actually changing the blood fat circulation, which talks to your hormones and your cytokines, you're basically your immune system. And when you give it the wrong input, right? So when you eat more saturated fat or processed foods, well, you're basically giving your body more oxidative stress. And when your blood vessels get oxidative stress, it starts getting damaged and inflamed and it builds plaque. basically plugs or like a pimple. And when you have a pimple in your blood vessels, well, it prevents you from getting nutrients and blood flow. You can't hydrate yourself. And it just so happens that this purple grape or dark, black grapes, they are rich in compounds that increase nitric oxide to help your blood vessels get larger. So it relaxes your blood vessels to help you improve blood flow. In addition, it lowers LDL oxidation, which then reduces plaque formation or pimple formation. And it improves HDL function, helping clear out arterial debris. So yes, you heard me right. You can actually clear plaque when you eat strategic whole foods that are plant-based. But most of the food that you will find in the supermarkets, basically 70% of it, they won't do this. Then there's this myth on social media about red wine. Heard about how it's healthy for you? So why do people think drinking red wine is healthy? Well, the redness is from this polyphenol. It's from this color, but it's not the alcohol. It's about what's in the grape skin. And in fact, if you remove the alcohol, you'll still get that benefit. That's basically grape juice. And the alcohol has been shown to be oxidative, to really be detrimental to your liver and your brain. And in fact, alcohol is the original fatty liver chemical before fructose that was known to absolutely cause fatty liver. I mean, everybody knows the term beer belly, right? How do you get a beer belly? Well, you drink alcohol to get that beer belly. And what's inside of that belly? It ain't full of muscle, it's full of fat. So drinking wine will give you the same effect in excess. And when you combine it with refined sugar and sodas, you're going to get to that fatty liver even faster because of the fructose. But the grape skin is so good that even drinking Concord grape juice, that purple dark color, can improve your memory. So red, black, purple grapes, they contain the highest level of resveratrol. And I know you've heard of this supplement resveratrol. Yeah, some Harvard professor made a big deal about it, right? Well, it doesn't really work unless you're a lab rat. But when you eat foods rich in resveratrol, there's basically synergy in the food that doesn't happen when you take supplements. That's why they're called supplements. When you eat synergistic ingredients, it brings out the best in resveratrol. So resveratrol has been shown to activate sirtuins, a longevity gene that increases mitochondria biogenesis, and it mimics some of the effects of fasting. It reduces inflammatory cytokines like NF-kappa B pathways, and it protects the neurons from oxidative stress. But grapes aren't just about resveratrol. They're loaded with other anthocyanins, pigments that support the brain health, reduce memory decline, and protect your retina and your microvasculature, your blood vessels. So think of grapes as a daily longevity microdose wrapped in something delicious. And whenever we talk about longevity, there's just no way to get around immunity, which starts with your gut microbiome. The polyphenols in this grape, they actually feed beneficial bacteria like Akkermansia and bifidobacteria. And this helps you strengthen your body, your gut barrier. It lowers endotoxin leakage, which is so inflammatory. So it reduces systemic inflammation and it supports liver detoxification. And interestingly, grape skin polyphenols, they also increase short chain fatty acids in the gut, particularly butyrate, which lowers colon cancer risks, improves insulin sensitivity, and nourishes gut lining cells. Now, this is a sweet fruit that feeds your gut, not diseases. So if you want the best results, choose whole grapes. Never add in grape juice in dried products. Now, juice strips the fiber and it spikes blood sugars more than whole fruit. Pair your grapes, again, with greens and legumes or nuts to slow glucose absorption because of that fiber in those other foods. And also toss them with salads, fruit platters, and blend them to lightly sweeten them in green drinks. You can choose red, black, or Concord grapes, preferably over green grapes because they have higher polyphenols. But I admit green grapes taste pretty good, especially the super ripe ones. And try to eat your grapes during the daytime to match your circadian rhythm of glucose metabolism. Now, I sometimes freeze them for a slow release, great sugar snack that is so satisfying for those hot days or when I crave dessert. Sometimes I make grape sorbet or I just freeze them just like this and bite on them as if they're a snack. So here's some specific recipes that you can try. For a crisp, refreshing salad, try a grape kale energy bowl. Kale, red grapes, hemp seeds, maybe a little bit of lemon and tahini drizzle, and mix that up with onion powder and nutritional yeast. Now, you can also take your grapes, mix it with lentil. That could be a grape lentil salad. You cook green lentils, half the grapes, put arugula, walnuts, balsamic vinegar. Now, you can also eat them frozen. Make sure you always wash any grape, and then you can freeze them. You can snack on them and maybe eat them like a sorbet-like treat. Now you can make a grape and chia parfait, chia pudding layered with smashed Concord grapes and a little bit of cinnamon. Savory grape salsa, dice some grapes, cilantro, jalapeno, Lemon juice, perfectly over some beans or tofu. Roasted grape with Brussels sprouts. You basically toss your grapes and Brussels sprouts with olive oil. You roast them until caramelized. Now, grape quinoa bowl. You pair grapes with quinoa, cucumber, mint, lemon dressing. And what about a grape cabbage coleslaw? Shredded cabbage, grapes, apple cider vinegar, a little bit of black pepper. How about a grape smoothie? Remember, no juice. Frozen grapes with kale, flaxseed, water, and unsweetened soy milk instead. And then you can have a grape almond energy roll up, grape halves wrapped in collard greens with a thin layer of almond butter inside. So if you eat these powerful foods, you can't help but improve your memory and metabolism. However, grapes aren't the only foods that are important to eat. And if you want to learn more about that, watch the next video.